Imagine waking up in a kingdom where the morning air is dry, carrying the scent of sand and distant spices, where the sun quickly turns the sky into a pale, relentless glare over mud brick homes and narrow, winding streets. This was the kingdom of ancient Egypt during the late 18th dynasty, a place of magnificent temples and quiet suffering, of grand processions and hidden fears among the people who lived under the gaze of their divine rulers. In this kingdom, the pharaoh was not just a ruler. He was the living embodiment of the gods, the one who kept the forces of chaos at bay through rituals, laws, and the quiet strength of tradition. Yet, in the corridors of the palace, among the cool stone halls and shaded courtyards, whispers told of the new king's unsettling decision to take his sister as his wife. A practice known, but rarely seen so publicly, even in a land where royal blood was sacred above all else. His name was Akhenaten, though he was born Amenhotep IV, a prince destined to rule after his father, Amenhotep III, one of the most celebrated kings of Egypt. Yet as Akhenaten grew into his role, he turned away from the old gods, declaring allegiance to a single deity, the Aten, the sun disk, whose rays touched everything and everyone equally. This shift would unravel centuries of religious order, anger the powerful priests, and confuse the people who clung to the old ways for safety in an uncertain world. Amid this religious revolution, Akhenaten's decision to marry his sister Nefertiti, or possibly another sister, ending on fragmented records, became a symbol of his defiance and a source of discomfort among his people. Royal siblings had married before, but Akhenaten's reign made this union a visible, daily reality. It was a marriage meant to preserve the divine bloodline, but it also isolated the royal family further from the people they ruled, reinforcing a sense that the pharaoh's world was becoming a closed circle of sun worship and hidden truths. The city of Akhenaten, built by Akhenaten as a new capital to honor the Aten, rose on the edge of the desert, away from the traditional seats of power in Thebes and Memphis. The city was laid out in straight lines and open plazas designed to embrace the sunlight that the pharaoh worshipped. But while the city was filled with temples to the Aten, the streets were dusty and hot, the people uneasy, and food was scarce, as resources were poured into this grand experiment in devotion. For the average farmer or craftsman, life under Akhenaten's rule was a continuation of endless labor. The fields along the Nile still needed tending, the mud bricks still needed forming, and the bread still needed baking in small clay ovens. Taxes were collected in grain and labor, and while the priests of Ammon had lost much of their power, the weight of royal demands did not lessen, leaving families to find small joys amid the daily struggle for survival. In the royal palace, the atmosphere was no less tense, as the courtiers tried to interpret the will of a king who saw himself as the only true intermediary between the people and the divine. The marriage to his sister became a sign of this separation from tradition and from the people, as if the royal family was now living in a different world, one bathed in harsh sunlight and strange prayers that few understood. But the winds of the desert do not respect the walls of kings, and rumors of discontent began to swirl around Akhenaten. The old gods were not so easily forgotten. and the priests who once held power were quietly waiting, watching as the kingdom grew weaker under the weight of a ruler's singular vision. The question of whether a kingdom could survive when its king chose the sun over the people and his sister over tradition lingered in the dry, restless air of the Egyptian dusk. By the time the city of Akhenaten had settled under the relentless Egyptian sun, the grand experiment of Akhenaten's rule was taking its slow, quiet toll on the kingdom. The city, with its wide streets and sun-drenched courtyards, was a place of strange silences. No grand festivals for Amen were held here. No incense curled in the temples of the old gods. Instead, the people rose with the dawn and worked under the harsh sky, quietly enduring the slow decay of their hopes as they watched the king and his sister queen walk the palace corridors, hidden in a world of sunlight and prayers to a single god. For many, life under Akhenaten meant fewer feasts, fewer offerings, and fewer jobs tied to the temples of Amen that had once fed thousands across Egypt. The priesthood, which had provided stability and care for the people, was stripped of its power and wealth, and the temples that once provided bread in times of famine were shuttered or repurposed. The people whispered of curses and angered gods, wondering if the relentless heat was the result of abandoning the old ways, questioning why the Nile's floods seemed lower each year. Inside the royal palace, Akhenaten and his sister queen lived in a world apart, holding court under the open sky with the Aten's rays drawn in stone reliefs around them. The marriage, meant to secure divine bloodlines, also became a symbol of isolation as Akhenaten pulled further away from the traditions that had guided the pharaohs before him. It was as if he believed that by marrying his sister and worshiping only the sun, he could remake the world in his image, blind to the discontent growing outside the palace walls. Meanwhile, in the markets of Akhenaten, life carried on with the weight of uncertainty. Traders still brought fish and grain. Potters still fired clay in smoky kilns. And farmers still carried bundles of reeds and baskets of dates to sell. Yet beneath each transaction lay the hush of fear, the knowledge that those who spoke against the king's religious changes risked punishment, and that the once celebrated festivals of Amen, Isis, and Osiris were now shadows of the past somewhere, whispered about in secret, behind closed doors. Akhenaten himself was often seen walking through the city with his sister wife and their children, holding their hands as they presented themselves as the perfect royal family blessed by the Aten. Yet even this image could not erase the growing shortages of food, the faltering trade routes, and the crumbling trust between the people and their ruler. The marriage to his sister, meant to protect the divine line, had instead become a symbol of the king's growing distance from the people, as he continued to demand loyalty to a faith that few understood or desired. As the sun set each day over Akhenaten, the people retreated into their homes, lighting small oil lamps to keep the darkness away. They told stories of the old gods in hushed tones, remembering the feasts and processions of the past, wondering if the Aten was listening, or if the gods they had worshipped for generations were waiting to reclaim their land. For many, the king's marriage to his sister was another sign that the world had turned upside down, that the order of Ma'at had been disrupted, and that the old balance of the world was slipping away. under the relentless sun. Outside the city, the priests of Amun and the old power brokers of Egypt were watching, waiting for the moment when Akhenaten's experiment would falter. As the priests and generals began to consider what would happen when the Sun King's light finally dimmed. As the days grew longer and the harvests thinner, the people of Egypt began to wonder what would come next. Would the Aten protect them? Would the Sun King and his sister wife continue their rule forever? Or would the old gods return to reclaim their land and their temples? As Egypt drifted further into uncertainty, under a king who believed he could change the world. In the final years of Akhenaten's reign, the quiet streets of Akhenaten felt heavier than ever. The markets were thin, the homes grew quieter, and the people continued their lives under the constant eye of the Aten, whose carved rays stretched across every temple wall. Behind these walls, whispers traveled faster than trade caravans. And the question that sat on everyone's tongue was simple. How much longer could the Sun King and his sister wife hold back the tide of Egypt's traditions? And what would happen when they finally could not? Akhenaten, once so certain in his devotion to the Aten, grew increasingly isolated, retreating into his palaces, surrounded by statues of himself and his family, basking in the eternal rays of the sun. He saw himself as the chosen one, the only voice through which the Aten could speak. And in his mind, his marriage to his sister was an extension of this divine order, a way to keep the blood of the gods pure, even as the world outside his walls began to fray. Beyond the city, Egypt's borders were weakening. The Hittites pressed in from the north, while rebellion simmered in lands that once sent tribute without question. The army, long underfunded and ignored in favor of Akhenaten's religious projects, found itself stretched thin. The once wealthy temples of Amun, stripped of their power, could no longer support local communities in times of famine or conflict. And the cracks in the kingdom widened under the relentless sun. Inside Akhenaten, the people continued to live their lives with quiet resilience. Women drew water from wells at dawn. Potters turned clay in smoky courtyards, and farmers prepared their baskets for market, all while the carved Aten above them looked on. Yet beneath the quiet lay a fear that the world they knew was slipping away, replaced by a kingdom devoted to a single god and a single family. Then, quietly, almost without notice, Akhenaten died. The cause remains a mystery, shrouded in the heat and dust of the Egyptian sun. Some say illness, others speak of palace intrigue. But what is clear is that the moment he was gone, the kingdom began to shift. His son, the young Tutankhaten, would soon take the throne. And with him came a return to the old gods, the reopening of the temples, and the slow, deliberate erasure of Akhenaten's city and his memory. Then, quietly, almost without notice, Akhenaten died. The cause remains a mystery, shrouded in the heat and dust of the Egyptian sun. Some say illness, others speak of palace intrigue. But what is clear is that the moment he was gone, the kingdom began to shift. His son, the young Tutankhaten, would soon take the throne, and with him came a return to the old gods, the reopening of the temples, and the slow, deliberate erasure of Akhenaten's city and his memory. The marriage that Akhenaten had seen as divine became just another line in Egypt's long history of royal unions. a strange and unsettling chapter that many sought to forget. The city of Akhenaten, once the center of the world for the Sun King, was abandoned, its temples left to the sand, its streets to the desert wind, and its walls to crumble under the weight of time. The people moved on, rebuilding their lives under the returned favor of Amen and the comforting rituals of the old gods. And yet, the story of Akhenaten and his sister wife remains, a reminder of a king who tried to reshape the world through devotion to a single god and a single family. Blind to the currents of his kingdom and the needs of his people. It is a story of how even the greatest powers can be undone by their own vision. How the relentless sun can both give life and take it away. And how, in the end, even kings who believe themselves to be gods must yield to the quiet, unyielding passage of time. As you lay in your bed tonight, you might wonder, what was it like to live in Akhenaten? To walk those dusty streets under the relentless sun? To watch your king marry his sister and call it divine? To feel the quiet hope and the heavy fear as your world changed around you? What would you have done if you had been there, watching the sun set over the city that was once meant to be the center of the world, now just another ruin under the endless Egyptian sky?